Hello, and welcome back to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we are once again outsmarting smart shapes. We are going to be looking at the settings for the Bend Hat tool and the guitar bend in the Smart Shapes palette here. And as we know, the Bend Hat tool is this one that looks like an upside down V, and that's what we're going to start with. Now, there's not a whole lot you can do in terms of attributes for the Bend Hat tool. In fact, there is placement and line thickness options only, really. And the placement can be found in Smart Shape placement, except there is no dedicated set of placements for the Bend Hat tool. As you can see, we only have these four options, and none of them are the Bend Hat tool. But in fact, the Bend Hat will use the same settings as the slur. So whatever settings you have in all these contingencies for the slur positioning, start points and end points, will also affect the Bend Hat. So if you're interested in that, go back to that video on the slur placement, and I talk about that extensively. And again, that will apply to the Bend Hat tool as well. All right. Now it sort of makes sense because a bend hat is similar to a slur in the sense that it's connected from one note to the next note, just like a slur would be. The one difference, or the main difference between a bend hat and a slur, is that the bend hats will not take on any of these smart slur options, which means that it's not using these engraver slurs, it's not doing this initial adjustment or avoidance of articulations or anything like that. So essentially, you're going to have problems where the bend hat is going to conflict with accidentals like it does right here. So in this case, you would have to do some manual adjustment because the bend hats, there is no smart bend hat adjustments, all right? But that's basically what you can do with that. And again, I said the only other thing you can do is really change the line thickness, and the line thickness is controlled from the Smart Shape options in this bottom right corner. Again, under line thicknesses here, it's set to 0.00765, but if we change that to 0.2, we'll see a much thicker bend hat tool. Again, just be careful because this setting, or these bottom right-hand settings, will apply to other elements within the Smart Shape palette. So by changing the thickness of the bend hat tool, you're going to end up changing thicknesses of a whole bunch of other different elements as well. So you just have to be cautious about that. And that's pretty much the bend hat tool. There's not a whole lot of else you can do with it. So let's start talking about the guitar bend, which is the tool right next to it, as we know. With the guitar bend, we do have some further placement options. And in fact, if we go to this menu here in the Smart Shape Placement dialog box, you'll see that there's an option for a guitar bend. And in fact, there are 6 different scenarios for guitar bend placement. And just like the other placement categories, this deals with the start horizontal, vertical, and end point horizontal and vertical. All right. And the difference between these scenarios has to do with whether or not the number on the tab line is on a line that's underneath the top line or if it's on the top line itself. So there's actually 3 settings for each. And as I go through these, you'll see the numbers are indicated somewhere in the middle of the tab line. And then the bottom 3, the numbers indicated on the top of the tab line. So there's actually separate settings for just the top line and any other line, essentially, is the first 3. All right. And again, with these placement positions, we really need to understand what the 0 points are. So for the first one, where it's the bend up from the note, the 0 point on the vertical will be the top edge of the note. And currently that's set to 0. If I make it a little bit higher, you'll see it go upwards. All right, that's not where we want it. And the horizontal is the right edge of the number. So if I put this at 0, you'll see it kind of line up with the right edge. So the start point 0 is essentially the top right corner of the number. And as always, we can always just hit reset to go back to the defaults that Finale provides us. As far as the end point, starting with the horizontal, in the case of the end point, the horizontal is centered on the number itself. It's not the right or left edge. And again, if we change this to a negative number, you'll see it move off to the left a little bit. Positive numbers will move off to the right as usual. All right. The vertical, however, is not the top edge of the number. It's actually the top line. So you'll see if I put this at 0, it will place it at the top line right there, right? So that's the difference between the end point vertical and start point vertical in this particular scenario, okay? So that's how you would deal with those placements. For the second option, where you're dealing with the bend back to, Again, it's sort of reversed actually, except for one thing, which I'll mention here. The start point for the horizontal now is directly centered with the note above it, and the vertical again is the top line of the tab staff. So if we again put that at 0, you'll see that get overlapping the top line there. As for the endpoint, now the horizontal is again center. It's not the left edge or right edge. It's center, and the vertical is the top edge. So if I set that to 0, you'll see that arrow basically line up with the top edge of the number. All right, so that's what that return bend placement is. And there's a separate setting for the quarter tones, for both quarter tones on frets below the first line and on the first line, or the top line. And this is also slightly different. The start point horizontal, again, is going to be the right edge of the number. So if we set that to 0, you'll see the point there. This window is confusing, by the way, because this 1 would never exist in a quarter bend, and you can see the difference between, this is actually what it is, but it's showing something different, which is sort of completely incorrect in my opinion, but it is what it is. Anyway, so the horizontal, again, is the right edge. The vertical is the top edge, making the 0 points on the start the upper right corner. The end point is interesting because the end point horizontal is also the right edge. If I were to set this to 0, it's not going to look the same here, but what will result in the score, if I can zoom in a little bit here, actually you need to set both of those to 0. If you set both of your horizontals to 0 on the quarter bend, what you'll get is a straight up and down line on the quarter bend. That is because the horizontal for the start and end point is the right edge, which is why this end point is set a little bit further out to the right in order to make it a curvy line that goes out to the right. The vertical for the end is also the top line, so if we set that to 0, you'll see it go back to the top line, and it would look something like that in your score. All right. Again, this window is wrong in my opinion. It shouldn't be showing like this, but alas, it does. And we can always reset. And the same exact things apply to the following 3 scenarios, except for the fact that these are unique to the fact that, or unique to the occasions when the fret numbers are on the top line. So you can actually set these a little bit different. And you'll see in some instances, I think the vertical at the end is different, right? So we have 0.16667 on this first one here. And on the other one, I think it's lower. Yeah, 0.13889, which I don't understand. I mean, I suppose those could be the same if you want. But that's that would be up to you. And you can kind of see the result of that too a little bit. It's sort of, you can kind of see it here. These frets are on the top line, and you can sort of see how it goes a little bit higher than the one that's coming off of a fret from a line below it, right? So that's how that works. Now, another thing to be aware of is when guitar bends are coming from 2 notes, like I have set up here. What's interesting is that if they're in the same layer, they will sort of come to the same point, and the text will overlap. Which sort of makes sense. That's sort of a good way to notate it, I think. Again, I'm not a guitarist, but I think that looks right. But interestingly, if you do this in different layers, for some reason, the positioning will not collide. Like, obviously, based on the placement positioning, these should be different, because as you saw, the end point for the fret on the top versus any other line is actually higher. But in this case, it Finale figures out that it wants to put it in the higher position here, but it doesn't do that when they're separate layers. So you just have to be cautious of that. And so that's the placement options for the guitar bend. There are some other specific options for the guitar bend, which I'm going to show you. If we go to Smart Shape menu, the fifth option down here is actually for guitar bends. And we can select that, and we get a few options that we can play around with, including place the release bend number in parentheses. If we uncheck that, it's pretty obvious. Those numbers that were in parentheses are now not. Recheck that. the hide bend to number. When I uncheck that, you'll see that these numbers will reappear in these middle, which I don't think that makes sense. Again, I'm not a guitarist, but that doesn't seem to make sense. You wouldn't change fingering, bending the note. And incidentally, if for whatever reason, I'm not a guitarist. I don't think this is correct, but if for whatever reason you use these guitar bends on normal notation, these first two options will not apply to your guitar bends on a normal notation staff. The automatically generate text. Now, obviously, you can see that the Finale will generate the half or full or 1.5 based on the distance to the bend, right? If we uncheck that completely, all of that will go away, and so you just get bends of an indeterminate amount, I guess. And if that's what you wanted to see, you could do that. And we also have the option of using either one or full for the full step bend. And by default, this is checked so that you will see the word full, but if you uncheck it, you'll see the number 1 instead of full. Let me zoom in a little more so you can see 1 versus full with that checked. And then other than that, the only other things we can do in here is just set the fonts for the text. We can set the font for the full text by changing it in this section. We can change the font and size for the whole number, and the font and size for the fraction. And you can see that Finale by default has the fraction set at 8 plain and the whole number set at 10 plain, so the fraction's a little bit smaller. So you get something that looks like that. Other than that, there's no other control that you have over those numbers. You can't like change the space between the whole number and the fraction, for example. That's pretty much set. And I don't think you can actually change the text of the word full. In fact, you can see it's sort of lowercase f-u-l-l. There's no way to change that to uppercase f. So that's basically your limitation right there. Anyway, this is interesting to know because, a lot of the texts in Finales, the fonts are controlled in the document options. For this guitar bend, it's completely controlled here. There's no document options for the fonts for guitar bends in the document options, right? It's all controlled right there. And finally, we can actually change the line for the guitar bend itself. And this is found in the Smart Shape options. In the Smart Line section, we have options for glissando, tab slide, and the custom line, but we also have one for guitar bend. And essentially what we can do is select guitar bend here and press select, and we can select from any of these Smart Line, custom Smart Lines to use as that line for the guitar bend. Now, I will mention that there is some limitations to this. One, it has to be either a solid line or a dashed line. You can't use something like this with the glissando, which is actually a character in the line style. That it wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't work. It has to be a solid or a dashed line. Two, it can't have any text. If I could put whatever I want in the text section here, and that text just won't show up on a guitar bend. Finale is trying to bend that line, so it doesn't really have a way to calculate where that text should go. Not that you'd ever need that. And it will also ignore all of the line adjustments and all of the endpoint. I'm sorry, not the endpoint, the hooks in the endpoint. It will ignore the hooks for the endpoint. Obviously, there is an endpoint for the guitar bend, and it happens to be this preset arrowhead, which, oops, my window went to my other screen, is this one. So you can actually change this arrowhead to, if you want an open arrowhead, just select it here in the Smart Line Designer for that guitar bend, and you'll see all of the guitar bends now have open arrowheads, right? So that's how you would do that. Go back here, guitar bend, select, edit our guitar bend. You can choose one of the other arrows if you want, or you can create a custom arrowhead. But these are the ones that come in Finale. These are more for pedal lines, so you'd have to actually create a new one if you wanted to. But that's basically what you can do. You could have no arrowhead, which would be weird too, I guess. If that's what you want to see. So basically, that's what you can do with that. Sorry, I'm just going to reset all this. Lots of windows in the Smart Lines. There you go. and back to normal. And so I think that's it. That covers the bend hat and the guitar bend settings. There's not a whole lot you can do with the bend hat. There's a few things you can do with the guitar bend settings, and hopefully this has been helpful, and hopefully you've learned all that. And thanks for watching. Come back. I think I have one or two more videos to do with outsmarting smart shapes, and we'll go from there. So once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon on the next video.